Never play chess with someone who knows they're not a pawn. People forget this simple truth. The average person spends over 90,000 hours at work in a lifetime, and yet most of those hours are spent playing roles other people scripted for them. Now imagine what happens when someone refuses to play that script, when someone refuses to stay average. See, here's the problem. They played with you like you were ordinary, disposable, just another face in the crowd. They thought they could toy with your value the way kids flick bottle caps on the street. But destiny doesn't work like that. It comes with receipts, and every move they made against you is stamped with spiritual consequences. And here's the funny part. When they dismissed you, they weren't really laughing at you. They were laughing at the version of themselves that couldn't comprehend your depth. Now, those chuckles sound a little nervous, don't they? This isn't karma in the feel-good Instagram quote sense. This is karma in the sense of a cosmic audit, where their games, their mocking, and their betrayal get totaled up, and the bill always comes due. Number one, they mistook patience for weakness. They mistook patience for weakness. They saw you waiting, holding back, not reacting the way they expected, and in their small minds that translated to powerlessness. To them, strength is loud, instant, and obvious. They thought if you weren't striking back immediately, it was because you couldn't. But patience is not passivity. Patience is strategy, and strategy is often invisible until it lands. What they didn't understand is that true power rarely rushes. The strongest storms don't arrive the moment the clouds form. They gather, they build. They shift the atmosphere long before the first drop falls. In the same way, your silence wasn't surrender. It was measurement. It was calculation. It was you understanding that some battles aren't won by swinging the fastest. They're won by moving at the right moment with precision when the strike can't be undone. Patience takes a kind of discipline most people will never master. It takes the strength to let someone laugh while you're still building, to let someone underestimate you while you're sharpening in secret. Weakness reacts to every insult, every poke, every provocation. Strength absorbs, observes, and waits until the right time to act. That's what they failed to see in you. Your refusal to play their games wasn't cowardice. It was the quiet confidence of someone who doesn't need to prove themselves in the middle of chaos. Here's the part they never saw coming. Patience has consequences. Every moment you waited, every second you chose not to respond in pettiness, you were storing up leverage. You were learning their patterns, seeing through their masks, and conserving energy for the day when it would actually matter. By the time they realize you weren't weak, it's already too late, because patience ages into clarity, and clarity leads to moves they'll never recover from. And now they're paying for it, because in confusing your calm with incapability, they revealed themselves. They showed you their intentions. They laid out their strategies. They played all their cards while you held yours close. And now, the one they mocked for doing nothing is the one who holds all the power. Patience was never weakness. It was the sharpest weapon you carried. Number two, they thought they controlled the game, not realizing they were the pieces. They thought they controlled the game, not realizing they were the pieces. That's the tragedy of arrogance. It convinces people that manipulation makes them powerful, when in reality it makes them blind. They moved against you with schemes, thinking they were clever, thinking every step was their idea, not knowing they were only being guided by something much larger than themselves. They thought they were writing the script, but they were just actors, following lines written long before they ever stepped on stage. When people believe they hold control over another person's life, it usually comes from fear disguised as power. They assumed pulling strings made them the puppet master. They mistook your silence for permission, your tolerance for helplessness, and your grace for ignorance. But the truth is, every move they made was already accounted for. Every scheme, every betrayal, every calculated insult only confirmed the role they were destined to play. They weren't directors, they were props in a storyline designed to expose them. There's a strange justice in this. The harder they tried to control you, the deeper they dug themselves into the plot they couldn't escape. It's like trying to cheat a system that already knows the outcome. Their attempts to twist the game in their favor only locked them into the exact consequences they thought they were avoiding. The moment they thought they had you cornered, was the moment they walked into their own trap. What they failed to see is that true control isn't about outsmarting others. It's about mastering yourself. They never had that. They were impulsive, desperate to prove superiority, unable to sit with the possibility that someone they treated as less could actually rise above them. And so they played themselves, because while they were busy trying to outmaneuver you, you were being elevated by the very forces they ignored. Now the board looks different. Their moves are exhausted, their influence has thinned, and their power has slipped through their hands. They thought they were the players, but all along they were the pawns. Pawns moved by greed, by fear, and by a destiny they never respected. The cruelest part is they'll only realize it when the game is already over. Number 3, they confused your kindness with unlimited access. They confused your kindness with unlimited access. To them, kindness meant you had no boundaries, no edge, no point at which you would draw the line. They mistook your giving nature as a permanent invitation to take without measure. It was never gratitude that drove them. It was entitlement. They believed your compassion was a weakness, a flaw to exploit, rather than the strength it truly was. People like that don't recognize the weight of generosity because they've never carried it. They don't understand the discipline it takes to keep showing up for others when the world has given you every reason to turn cold. They saw your patience, your willingness to forgive, your openness to help, and they assumed it was endless. But kindness is not a free pass. It is not bottomless. And once it is abused, it transforms. The hand that gave so freely becomes the hand that withholds without apology. The irony is that they thought taking advantage of you made them smart. They thought they were getting away with something. In reality, all they did was write themselves out of the very blessing your kindness carried. Because access to someone with a good heart is not just access to favors or help. It's access to growth, protection, and energy that multiplies everyone around it. When they drained it, mocked it, or ignored it, they weren't just using you. They were burning down the bridge to their own elevation. And this is where the consequences come in. When someone abuses kindness, the loss is never neutral. They don't just lose your support, they inherit the void left behind by your absence. They find out that what they called ordinary was rare. They find out that what they treated as replaceable is not easily found again. And worse, they discover that kindness, once betrayed, does not return the same way. What they fail to realize is that kindness is a choice, not an obligation. You chose to give, to show up, to extend yourself. You never owed them that. And when the choice is gone, so is the access. Now they are left staring at a closed door, wondering why the same heart that once fed them now ignores their hunger. They thought your kindness was weakness, but in the end it was their test. A test they failed without even knowing they were being examined. Number 4, they trained you in the dark without knowing. They trained you in the dark without knowing. Every time they underestimated you, every insult they threw, every betrayal they staged, they thought they were breaking you down. What they didn't realize was that they were building you up. Their cruelty was never the end of you. It was the furnace that stripped away the unnecessary parts, the excess weight, the doubts you didn't need to carry. What they meant for harm was the very thing that sharpened your edge. The darkness they pushed you into became your classroom. They believed isolation would weaken you, but it only forced you to discover strength they couldn't touch. They thought rejection would starve you, but it only taught you how to feed yourself from places they could never reach. They thought mocking you would silence you, but it only trained your voice to grow louder in your spirit until it no longer needed their validation. There's a strange power in being underestimated. When people count you out, they stop watching, they stop guarding, they stop preparing for your rise because they believe there's nothing to prepare for. That's when growth becomes dangerous, because it happens quietly, hidden, unnoticed. While they laughed, you learned. While they plotted, you studied. While they tried to bury you under insults, you were becoming someone they would never be able to stand against. The truth is, their cruelty revealed them more than it ever revealed you. It showed their fear, it showed their limits. It showed how much effort they were willing to put into trying to contain you. And in doing so, they became your unintentional teachers. They gave you lessons in resilience, endurance, and focus that no comfort could have ever provided. Now the very training they forced on you has backfired. You are sharper, stronger, and more aware than you ever would have been without their attacks. They thought they were crafting your downfall, but they were chiseling away at your potential, bringing out a version of you they didn't have the vision to see. They thought they were destroying you, when in truth, they were preparing you for the very heights they wanted to keep you from. They trained you in the dark, but now you move like someone who no longer fears the light. Number 5, they wanted to humble you, but they only humbled themselves. They wanted to humble you, but they only humbled themselves. That was always the real intention. Disguise envy as advice, cover insecurity with fake concern, and package sabotage as humility. They didn't want you to grow too fast, shine too bright, or rise too high, because your very existence exposed the smallness of their own efforts. To them, your potential wasn't just intimidating, it was threatening. And instead of confronting their own lack of discipline or vision, they tried to drag you down to where they were comfortable. Humility in their version wasn't about balance or perspective, it was about control. They wanted you to believe you were ordinary, replaceable, nothing special. They wanted to convince you to play small so they wouldn't have to feel small standing next to you. That's not humility. That's fear wearing a mask. Real humility isn't afraid of greatness in others. Real humility applauds it, respects it, and even learns from it. But what they practiced wasn't humility, it was manipulation. The irony is that in trying to shrink you, they exposed their own insecurities. By fighting so hard to make you doubt yourself, they revealed how deeply they doubted themselves. By insisting you were average, they showed just how much your presence disturbed their sense of normal. Every attempt to cage your confidence, every subtle insult meant to cut you down, every sarcastic laugh when you spoke your dreams, it all pointed back to one truth. They were terrified of what you might become if you ever fully believed in yourself. And that's where the reversal happens. Because the harder they worked to humble you, the clearer it became that they were the ones standing on shaky ground. You didn't need to expose them. They exposed themselves by their obsession with limiting you. They revealed the cracks in their own foundation. They humbled themselves by showing the world just how fragile they were when confronted with someone who refused to stay small. In the end, you didn't need to prove anything. You didn't need to fight for your greatness or argue about your worth. Their behavior testified louder than your words ever could. They wanted to humble you, but instead they documented their own fear, their own envy, and their own lack of faith in who they could have been. Their plan backfired, and now humility belongs to them, not you. Number 6, they thought their applause defined you. They thought their applause defined you. In their minds, your value began and ended with their recognition. If they clapped, you were somebody. If they stayed silent, you were nothing. That's how shallow their understanding of you was. They thought you lived off their approval like air. But what they never realized is that your worth was established long before they ever laid eyes on you. Their applause was never the fuel, it was just background noise. People who depend on validation often assume everyone else does too. They believed you needed their acceptance to feel whole, that their compliments were the gatekeepers to your confidence. That's why they withheld praise when you deserved it or gave it sparingly, like crumbs tossed to keep you hungry. They thought they were controlling your momentum by rationing recognition. But the truth is, you were never waiting for their hands to meet. You were already moving forward, with or without their cheers. Here's the twist they didn't see coming. When applause becomes the measure of worth, those who give it start thinking they hold the power. But applause is cheap. Anyone can clap, anyone can praise. What's rare is someone who rises without it. And that's exactly what unsettled them about you. The fact that their silence couldn't stop you, that their criticism couldn't derail you, that their recognition or lack of it meant absolutely nothing to your progress. Now they're learning the hard truth. Your rise doesn't wait for validation. It doesn't pause because people don't notice. It doesn't slow because people refuse to acknowledge it. Growth is stubborn like that. Purpose is relentless like that. While they were deciding whether or not to approve of you, you were becoming undeniable. Their silence didn't bury you. It just magnified the sound of your own footsteps, and the most humbling part for them, they have to watch you succeed without ever having had a hand in it. They don't get to rewrite history and say, we always knew. No, their lack of applause is on record. Their absence of support is carved into memory. And now your rise exposes what they tried to hide, that they never defined you and they never could. You didn't need their validation to start, and you won't need their applause to finish. Number 7, they tried to reduce you, but ended up reducing themselves. They tried to reduce you, but ended up reducing themselves. That's the strange thing about attempting to belittle someone who carries destiny. It never sticks to the person being attacked. The words, the schemes, the mockery, the attempts to cut you down to size, all of it bounces back. Because when someone tries to strip away what was never theirs to give, they end up stripping away pieces of themselves. Their plan was simple. Make you question yourself. Make you feel small enough to stay contained, doubtful enough to stop moving forward. They thought they could box you in with labels, with whispers, with subtle digs meant to chip away at your confidence, but you cannot shrink what was built to expand. The more they tried to compress your light, the more it revealed just how limited theirs really was. In trying to drag you down, they exposed the ceiling on their own growth. The thing they didn't understand is that destiny isn't fragile. It doesn't collapse under insults or crumble under manipulation. If anything, it becomes clearer under pressure. Every attempt to make you less only highlighted what made you more. Every time they dismissed you, they reduced the credibility of their own judgment. Every time they mocked you, they revealed their own insecurity. Every attempt to deny you only proved how deeply they believed you were a threat. And here's where the reversal stings the most. The reduction they hoped would weaken you actually aged into evidence of their own weakness. People saw it. They saw the bitterness, the envy, the need to keep you small. In trying to make you look unworthy, they accidentally showed just how unworthy they felt next to you. That's how reduction works. It doesn't travel in one direction. It circles back and settles on the one who launched it. Now, the only thing smaller is their influence, their voice, their presence in the story they tried to dominate. They thought they were dimming your light, but all they did was reveal how dim theirs already was. They thought they could reduce you, but in the process, they became reduced to exactly what they feared most: irrelevant. Number 8, they mocked your vision until it became their reality. They mocked your vision until it became their reality. When you spoke, they rolled their eyes. When you shared your ideas, they smirked. They thought your dreams were too far-fetched, too bold, too unrealistic for someone like you. To them, your vision was entertainment, a joke to laugh at over conversations, proof that you were out of touch. But vision has a way of outliving laughter. What they dismissed as delusion has now unfolded into the very environment they can't escape. The truth is, people often laugh at what they secretly fear. They weren't laughing because your vision was impossible. They were laughing because it was too possible. It rattled them. It challenged their comfort. It confronted their decision to settle while you chose to see further. Their mockery was nothing more than an attempt to cover up the discomfort of knowing they lacked the courage to imagine as boldly as you did. But the clock has a way of exposing truth. As time moved forward, the things you once spoke about, the paths you foresaw, the outcomes you warned them of, the heights you knew you would reach started appearing in plain sight. Suddenly what they once mocked was undeniable. The fantasy became the framework of their reality, and the punchline became the prophecy. The irony? They don't just have to admit you were right, they have to live inside the world you predicted, and that is the sharpest consequence of all. Because now every step they take, every decision they make is filtered through a reality they once laughed at. They thought their laughter erased truth, but laughter doesn't erase. It only delays recognition. They tried to bury your vision under mockery, but visions are like seeds. They grow whether or not anyone claps, laughs, or believes. Now they walk on the very ground that your foresight prepared, and the cruel twist, they no longer get to stand above it and laugh. They are bound to it, shaped by it, and humbled under it. What they once mocked has become the rule of their lives. And every day they are reminded that the vision they ridiculed was the very one that saw further than their laughter ever could. Number 9. They treated your presence like it was replaceable. They treated your presence like it was replaceable. To them, you were just another face, another option, someone who could be swapped out the moment you didn't bend to their expectations. They acted as if your energy was common, as if your contribution could be duplicated, as if who you were could be easily replicated in someone else. That's the arrogance of people who have never truly understood value. They only recognize it when it's gone. What they fail to grasp is that presence is not just about being physically there. Presence is influence. It's the way the atmosphere changes when you walk into a room. It's the way ideas flow differently when you speak. It's the unexplainable weight of your energy, the thing that can't be touched, measured, or replaced by anyone else. They confused access with ownership. They thought because they had you near, they had you figured out. But proximity does not equal understanding, and access does not guarantee permanence. Now, in your absence, the void is undeniable. The same people who downplayed you are realizing that things don't feel the same, don't move the same, don't breathe the same without you. They tried to replace you with noise, with distractions, with substitutes who lacked the essence you carried. But no matter how many bodies fill the space, the atmosphere remains hollow. That's the cost of taking presence for granted. You only understand its depth when it's no longer available to you. Your absence has become its own teacher. It has taught them that some people are rare not because of what they do, but because of who they are. It has shown them that losing you wasn't just about losing help, attention, or support. It was about losing a force that elevated everything it touched. The lesson is sharp. You cannot dismiss what you never understood, and you cannot replace what was never ordinary. And the cruelest part? They didn't lose you because you were weak or forgettable. They lost you because they treated something extraordinary as if it were common. Now the silence speaks, the void echoes, and the absence they created has become their reminder that presence was never physical. It was power, and that power is no longer theirs to experience. Number 10, they mistook delay for denial. They mistook delay for denial. They looked at the gap between your effort and your breakthrough and assumed it meant failure. In their shallow understanding, if success didn't show up quickly, it wasn't coming at all. They measured your destiny against the clock on their wrist as if timing was proof of truth. Because you hadn't yet reached the point they expected, they decided you never would. But prophecy doesn't bow to impatience. It doesn't shrink because the crowd gets restless. It unfolds when it's meant to, not when spectators demand it. Delay has always been part of the process, not because you weren't capable, but because capacity had to be built in you first. Delay is where discipline is formed, where strength is refined, where clarity is sharpened. They didn't understand that while they were laughing at your lack of progress, you were gaining something far more important than speed. You were gaining roots. A tree that takes longer to grow roots stands taller and stronger when it finally rises. They only saw the waiting, they never saw the foundation. The problem is, they wanted your journey to match their timeline. They assumed they could predict your arrival the way people assume the sun will rise at a certain time every day, but destiny doesn't move like that. Destiny arrives when the conditions are ready, not when impatient eyes demand a show. And when it comes with force, sudden, undeniable, and often at the exact moment they thought nothing was ever going to happen for you. Now they're faced with the reality that their assumptions were wrong. The delay wasn't denial, it was protection. It was preparation. It was the stretch of silence before the sound that shakes everything. They laughed in the waiting season, not realizing that waiting seasons are never wasted. And now that the breakthrough has appeared, it carries the weight of time, the weight of patience, the weight of every moment they thought was wasted. They thought delay meant you were finished. But in truth, the delay meant you were only just beginning. And now, when prophecy unfolds in its own timing, they'll have to sit with the embarrassment of knowing their impatience blinded them to what was inevitable all along. Number 11, they were playing checkers while you were playing dimensions. They were playing checkers while you were playing dimensions. Their minds were locked into short-term moves, basic strategies, and shallow games meant to win small victories. They thought being clever in the moment was enough to outsmart you. They assumed you were thinking at their level, reacting to their little traps, chasing after the crumbs they set in front of you. What they didn't realize is that you were never operating on the same board. Their checkers match was loud and messy, but your strategy was layered, quiet, and far beyond what they could even conceive. That's the problem with people who think manipulation is power. They measure success by quick wins, not realizing that real power comes from patience, foresight, and vision. While they were celebrating a move they thought outplayed you, you had already anticipated it, absorbed it, and folded it into a larger plan they couldn't touch. They were stuck on red and black squares while you were navigating levels they didn't even know existed. Their focus was survival, yours was destiny. The irony is that they believed their shallow tactics were genius. They confused trickery with intelligence, control with wisdom. They thought cutting corners and setting traps made them superior, but it only exposed their lack of depth. They never once stopped to consider that you had already outgrown those games before they even began. To them it was a match. To you it was a lesson. They didn't outplay you. They trained you to move beyond limits they could never break. And this is why their downfall was inevitable. A checkers player can't defeat someone who sees in dimensions. Every move they made was already accounted for in a design that stretched further than their vision. They were predictable. You were expansive. They thought they were in control, but control is meaningless when you don't even understand the field you're standing on. Now the game is over, and they're left wondering how they lost when they thought they had you cornered, but it was never even close. They were trapped inside their own small patterns while you were moving in silence across dimensions. That's the difference between temporary scheming and timeless strategy. They can't penetrate what was never designed for them to understand. Number 12. They thought they could outrun spiritual debt. They thought they could outrun spiritual debt. To them, consequences were only real if they could be seen. Laws, punishments, public exposure. As long as no one caught them in the act, they believed they were free. They moved through life as if actions disappeared once the moment passed, as if betrayal, cruelty, and manipulation carried no lasting weight. But what they didn't realize is that the Spirit records everything. Nothing vanishes, nothing is forgotten, and Spirit collects debts far more ruthlessly than any bank ever could. When someone borrows from a bank and fails to repay, there are warnings, deadlines, negotiations. But when someone borrows from the spiritual order, when they take from others what was never theirs, when they sow destruction, when they betray trust, the repayment doesn't come with notice. It comes suddenly, and it comes multiplied. Spiritual debt doesn't deal in dollars, it deals in balance. It restores what was broken, often at the cost of the one who broke it. They thought their secrets protected them. They thought their cleverness erased accountability. But spiritual debt doesn't need proof or witnesses. It doesn't need a court to judge. The debt is written into the very fabric of cause and effect, waiting for the moment it must return. And the cruel part is that it doesn't just return in the form they expect. Sometimes it shows up in the loss of opportunities, the crumbling of influence, the very doors they work to open slamming shut in their faces. Other times it appears in the gnawing emptiness of a life that should feel full but doesn't. What they fail to see is that you can escape human punishment, but you cannot escape spiritual balance. Spirit has patience, and that patience is merciless. It allows people to build, to boast, to flaunt, all while their debt quietly accrues interest. By the time payment comes due, it's heavier than anything they imagined. And no lawyer, no excuse, no trick can negotiate the terms. They assumed consequences only lived in the physical. They forgot that the invisible world governs the visible one. And now the very debt they mocked is the weight they must carry. In trying to outrun what they owed, they only guaranteed that when the bill arrived, it would arrive in full, and they would not have the strength to pay it. Number 13, they thought you were the lesson. They thought you were the lesson. They assumed your purpose in their story was to be corrected, humbled, or broken down. To them, you were the warning sign, the example of what not to be. They treated you as if your struggles, your silence, your stumbles existed just to give them material to laugh at, talk about, or feel superior to. They thought your life was the cautionary tale. But the truth is, they were the ones being studied. And they didn't even realize it. You weren't the lesson. You were the mirror. Your presence revealed who they really were, not who they pretended to be. Your patience exposed their lack of it. Your generosity highlighted their greed. Your consistency shamed their instability. Even your flaws uncovered their inability to show compassion. Everything about you forced out the truth they tried so hard to bury, and because mirrors are uncomfortable, they chose to attack you rather than face themselves. People hate mirrors when they don't like their reflection. Instead of fixing the blemishes, they break the glass. That's what they did with you. They mocked, they dismissed, they betrayed, all in an effort to silence the discomfort of seeing themselves through you. But breaking a mirror doesn't erase the face. It only multiplies the reflection, and that's why their efforts backfired. The harder they tried to make you the lesson, the more they exposed their own blindness, envy, and fear. And here's the twist: they'll never want to admit. You never had to prove anything to them. You never had to force them to see who they were. Their reactions told the whole story. In the way they treated you, they testified against themselves. Their choices became the record. They thought your life would be the evidence of weakness, but in the end, their response to you became the evidence of their failure. The real lesson wasn't you, it was them. And it will haunt them, because deep down, they know it. They thought you were the example of limitation, but you were only the mirror reflecting the limitations they carried within. You walked away sharper, stronger, wiser. They're left staring at themselves, forced to live with the reflection they spent so long trying to deny. Number 14, they didn't just lose you, they lost access to who they could have been with you. They didn't just lose you, they lost access to who they could have been with you. That's the part that stings the most, though they'll never admit it. Losing you wasn't just about losing a person, it was about losing the doors that only opened because you were there. You weren't just giving time, energy, or support. You were a key, unlocking versions of them they never would have reached on their own. By pushing you aside, by treating you as ordinary, they didn't just walk away from you. They walked away from themselves. You see, every meaningful connection doesn't just add, it multiplies. Being around someone with vision sharpens yours. Walking with someone disciplined strengthens your own discipline. Standing next to someone with courage exposes your cowardice and dares you to rise above it. You carried that kind of presence. You carried the weight of transformation, but instead of valuing it, they mocked it, played with it, and discarded it as if it was replaceable. And in doing so, they discarded the future versions of themselves that only your presence could have drawn out. This is the mistake people make when they underestimate someone significant. They assume the loss is external, but the real loss is internal. They think they only lost a relationship, a partnership, or a friend. They don't realize they lost access to growth, clarity, and strength that only came alive in your presence. The path they were meant to step into closed the moment they chose to play games with you. And here's the irony. While you continue to evolve, they remain stuck. You keep climbing into higher versions of yourself, but they are locked in the same cycle, unable to break through because they let go of the very person who could have shown them how. It isn't that they just lost you, they lost the reflection of who they might have become had they honored the connection. That's the price of carelessness. They thought they were just wasting your time, but they were wasting their own future. Now they're left with the realization that you were never just a chapter in their story. You were the turning point. And by playing with you, they played themselves out of the best version of who they could have been. What they tried to do to you, every insult, betrayal, and doubt, has become the very thing that elevated you. They mistook patience for weakness, influence for control, kindness for weakness, and delay for denial. But every miscalculation only sharpened your edge. They played small games while you moved in dimensions they couldn't perceive. They thought applause defined you, that their validation was your measure, but your worth was never theirs to give. They tried to reduce you, to humble you, to mock your vision, and in doing so they revealed themselves. Their fear, their envy, their short-sightedness. They carried it all while thinking they were controlling your path. They believed they could outrun consequences, that they could ignore spiritual debt, that they could shape your destiny, or worse, that you were the lesson. But in reality, they were being taught. Every attempt to diminish you ricocheted back to them. Every act of cruelty became the furnace that forged your power. And every moment they laughed at your potential only highlighted their own limitations. Now, they're learning what they never wanted to see. Your presence wasn't just physical, it was energetic, transformative, and impossible to replace. Your absence doesn't just leave a void for them, it leaves a space where the versions of themselves that could have risen alongside you will never exist. You weren't just a player in their story, you were the unseen force they underestimated, the mirror they refused to face, and the turning point they ignored. And the ultimate irony is this: they thought they were shaping you, holding you down, or teaching you lessons. The truth is, Every misstep they made, every attempt to control you, every mocking word, they only tightened the thread of your destiny. And now, while they scramble in the shadow of what they dismissed, you stand elevated, undeniable, unstoppable, and untouched by their limited vision. They played with you like you were average, but the universe and your own strength has made it very clear. They were the ones who will pay the consequences. And the world will remember not the attempts to suppress you, but the unstoppable force that rose because they underestimated it. If this message hit you hard, don't just watch it fade, make it count. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the truth that most people are too blind to see. Hit the like button if you feel the weight of this story and leave a comment sharing your thoughts because your voice matters here. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's been underestimated, ignored, or doubted. Let them know that their strength is undeniable and that the ones who tried to hold them back are the ones paying the price. Stay sharp, stay unstoppable, and never let anyone else define your worth. Stay blessed always.